get this clicker to work. Okay, well, thanks everyone, firstly, for joining us here to listen about this exciting topic. And dare I say, I think the speakers before me have captured pretty much a lot of what I was going to say, so I'm going to try and condense the notes that I had to some relevant points for you all today. So here's what I'm going to do. There's really three bits that I'll talk about today. First is a little bit about Cleanaway, if you'll indulge me, and the reason for that is the reason we embarked on a strategy to develop energy from waste projects becomes really clear when you have a bit more understanding of what Cleanaway does as an organization. Second, then we'll just quickly talk about the progress update on where we are with the projects that we are developing. And then finally, I'll close with the vision that we have around a circular precinct and how energy from waste can act as a catalyst for that precinct. So before I begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the beautiful land on which we meet today, the Gumbaynggirr people. And they're traditionally also known as the sharing people because of they would share the abundance of the bounty that they have here in these lands with other nations, and I think their deep cultural and spiritual connection to the land really, hopefully, gives us the inspiration today as we imagine a bit more of a circular economy for Australia. So the first bit, as we said, a little bit about Cleanaway. So with nearly 8,000, I'm going to try and move this slide. All right. So with nearly 8,000 team members, Cleanaway is Australia's largest integrated waste management and recycling company. We operate across 330 sites in Australia. And by integrated, we mean that we operate across the entire value chain, servicing the needs of really a broad range of customers, all the way from a fish and chip shop to retailers such as Coles, from servicing the local mechanic and repair shop to large oil and gas customers like Santos, from servicing local councils to servicing Department of Defence. So our customer range is really broad, and the offerings that we bring to the table to try and solve the needs of those clients is equally broad. And also by an integrated value chain, what we mean is that we participate along that whole waste, recycling, recovery value chain. And in that, you're all familiar with our activities in collecting municipal and commercial waste. We handle that material safely through our aggregated transfer stations and ensure that it moves in a safe manner as well to its end destinations. We also, of course, participate in recycling and recovery of materials. For example, through our state-of-the-art recycling facilities, such as the newly commissioned Blacktown MRF here in Sydney. That sorts the materials that go through that facility, which is predominantly the yellow bin or the commingled recycling, as some would know it as, into high-grade, high-quality materials of individual streams of PP, PET, HDP, cardboard, paper, to ensure that it goes into that remanufacturing process, whether onshore or sometimes overseas. The recovered PET, HDP, and PP from these facilities, believe it or not, is in Victoria, is also delivered to recycled REPT, so that's recycled PET plant and recycled HDP plant in Victoria that Cleanaway jointly operates, the assets are jointly owned, we don't operate the facility, but that makes the whole recycled chain a reality in Australia. That is bottle-to-bottle recycling that is happening right here onshore. So hopefully that gives us an inspiration. I think a few years ago, 7-8 years ago, before the China ban, we would have really struggled with the idea of a bottle-to-bottle recycling here in Australia, and that is a reality today, and continuing to progress on that journey. And I think energy from waste is also in that journey towards really making it a reality. Our liquids and hydrocarbons business as well collects waste oils and then treats them through our refineries and ensures that they find a way into recycled waste oil. So, for materials that obviously can't be recovered, and that's our residual waste or hazardous waste, we ensure that we treat it safely and make sure it's deposited in its final resting place in an environmentally safe manner. And that's where I think for us the journey on for energy from waste really begins, is when we look at that residual waste and what happens to it in the coming decades. Just to bring all of that to life really, really quickly, I'm going to use some numbers. So in 2024, we recycled 104 million litres of oil. We captured 4.8 petajoules of gas from our landfills. And we produced 225 gigawatt hours of electricity. Also collected 2,048 kilotons of material through the CDS schemes that we now operate in most states. And then very quickly on our emissions profile. So if you look at Cleanaway's emissions profile today, 73% is made up of methane that comes from our landfills. And 27% of our emissions profile is made up of carbon dioxide. That mainly comes from the 6,000, fleet of 6,000 vehicles that we operate to collect material across the country. We have aligned ourselves to the 1.5-degree ambition. And I am proud to say that as Cleanaway, we are on target at least to get there, especially with our methane reduction targets. And in that methane space, we have 3 key levers that we are pulling. First is to ensure we continue to work and innovate and put investment into capturing more landfill gas, and that's going really well. You saw that in one of the charts earlier that was from Joe Pickin. Australia itself is getting really, really good at capturing landfill gas, and of course we play our part in that, which is great. The second is continuing to invest in diversion of food waste away from landfill, and that is through investments in facilities like EGO in Sydney, allowing FUGO processing to go ahead, and also ensuring that we help our customers by coming together with investments through depackaging facilities as well, where you can take that material today that is packaged food waste and ensure that, again, it finds a life and away from landfill. The third pillar in helping us achieve that methane reduction and the 1.5-degree ambition that we've set ourselves really lies on the shoulders of ensuring we can find sustainable and circular pathways away from landfill. And part of that, while energy from waste is by no means a circular solution, is definitely a more superior and environmentally, as well as when you take into account the impacts of broadly on landfill, bringing our energy from waste facilities online is the third and really key pillar for us as well. And so with that in mind, I wanted to, bring to life that when we embarked on our Blueprint 2030 strategy back in 3 years ago, that is where energy from waste really shaped as Blueprint 1 for Cleanaway, i.e. what that really means is that it is a key pillar that we wanted to invest in to continue and progress our efforts towards diverting away from landfills into building facilities that can help us achieve that transition in Australia. So, what does that all mean for us today, and what are we doing with all those the 3 projects that we have? So some of you may be familiar, some may not be familiar. For us, what that meant 3 years ago was that we embarked on 3 projects to build 3 facilities across the eastern seaboard. 1 in Melbourne, 1 in Brisbane, and 1 in Sydney. I'll come to the Sydney one last, because this is probably where we are probably the most behind, but Melbourne is the most progressed. Before we go to that, let me start by just probably touching really quickly on what is required to develop and hopefully build an energy from waste project in Australia. Keeping aside the social license and political courage, it really varies state by state. And as a company that is progressing 3 projects across 3 states, I think we've got a little bit of an insight as to the challenges and the barriers and what's working, what's not working. But there are some common elements that are shared across the states as well. Very broadly, site selection, of course, with the exception of New South Wales, where you can only build the facilities in the approved location. Planning and environmental approvals, and going through that process and ensuring your project is fit for purpose. That does take a long time. Securing feedstock, I think Andrew touched really well on that in his presentation. Feedstock does underpin these projects, and having those conversations with councils and making sure that we can continue to educate and share the dialogue around what is required, why do we require long-term contracts to bring these facilities online, and how that actually is a shared benefit across both parties when you do participate in contracts of that nature. And then, of course, no less a challenge is securing an EPC partner, and that means somebody that's going to build the facility for you, partner with you, and do it in a way that can come online on time and delivered in full. That is required by your funding and financing partners, but of course for you as a project developer, that is quite key. And then, of course, securing funding to build your project as well. These are private projects, ensuring that the project is robust enough at that stage so you can get to financial investment decisions. So I'm really excited to hear that Andrew thinks Parks can get there by I think you said quarter 2 2027 or early 27, and I think that's really exciting because I think a few years ago, we would have all felt that the time frame was a little bit longer. So, quickly discussing the variations by state. Of course, we quickly touched on New South Wales. Here, it's not so much about site selection. You do have to you can only build in the locations that are pre-approved by the EPA in those zones. Having said that, in Victoria, we have the CAP process. So that is an additional application that you have to go through as a developer, and all that means is you're allocated a certain cap of feedstock that you can then take through your facility. It is obviously an added process that you need to go through, so it creates some interesting challenges commercially in that market. Okay. Let's see. All right, so quick status update on our projects. Melbourne is the most progressed, as I said earlier. Where we sit with Melbourne is we secured a site nearly 3 years ago. We secured 82 hectares in the north of Melbourne in Wollert, and we started a process to go through the environmental and planning approvals. Where we sit with Melbourne today is that hopefully in the next 3 to 6 months, we hope to hear on the outcome of our 3 applications: our development license with the EPA, our planning permit with the planning department, as well as the CAP application, which we submitted last month. So in the next 3 to 6 months, once we hear the outcomes of those processes, we can then progress to the next stage, which really is all about securing feedstock and getting to financial close in Melbourne. In Brisbane, which is slightly behind Melbourne, we have a site in Bromilton. That's a slightly smaller site than Melbourne. It's about 63 hectares. Bromilton is an industrial estate, so its purpose for an energy from waste facility, it's a really good location to be located in. Of course, you've got to figure out the logistics challenges of moving that material outside of Brisbane, but it's not that far away either. Where we are in Brisbane is we are progressing with our planning and approvals with the aim of having them submitted by Q3 this year. So by September, around October this year, our submissions should be in. So slightly, a couple of years behind Melbourne from that perspective, and then progressing that journey similar to Melbourne of landing the approvals, in parallel starting to do the diligence activities around grid connections and ancillary infrastructure that is required to bring these facilities to life. So, best for last, in Sydney. I think all I'm going to say is that we eagerly await the outcome of the New South Wales options paper. We are very interested in the West Lithgow precinct. We have done some early due diligence studies to ensure that material can be moved safely, reliably, and efficiently through rail over the Blue Mountains to that location. So suffice to say that we eagerly wait what happens with the options paper, and we'll be ready to hopefully put forward a proposal for that location once that certainty, I suppose, is there. So, finally, I did say to you there's only 2 slides, and this is our final one. Okay. When we think about West Lithgow, it's a great location because you look at the legacy of that old power station there, and it really encourages you and inspires you to think about a precinct where energy from waste could really activate a precinct opportunity for that region. So talking about precincts, Cleanaway has a vision for enabling a circular precinct as well. Now, industrial symbiosis lies at the heart of our vision for a circular precinct. Some of you may remember the biology class in year 7 or 8 of what is symbiosis. Well, it obviously happens a lot in nature where 2 organisms come, together and they benefit from being with each other for different reasons, whether it be the bacteria that attaches itself to leguminous plants and, gets the nitrogen going up the plant and has a place to live. Well, for us, it is the industrial symbiosis version of that. An energy from waste facility can activate that precinct. And I think for Australia, it would be a wasted opportunity if we didn't think in a precinct form. What we mean by that, for example, is if you think about energy from waste, and just imagine for a second, you have an energy recovery facility. You saw both, Rob talked about it as well as Scott did. The outputs are power and heat. Now, you can, of course, export the power directly to grid, and that's baseload power, fantastic. You can also ensure that power has behind the meter off-takers as well, if they can co-locate on your facility and have broader benefits that go just beyond the use of power. And that's where heat comes in. Now with heat, there's a lot of heat produced in these facilities. And when you look at UK and Europe, there's parts in Europe that really took that planning and policy perspective early on and ensured that they had created an ecosystem where you encourage the uptake of heat upfront. UK was slightly behind. They went through a great journey of moving away from landfills into energy from waste, but are just now trying to retrofit onto the heat pathway 20 years later. So I think in Australia we have that opportunity where, for a heat perspective, you can either move the facility and locate it next to an existing user of heat, and that's the case in Maryvale in Victoria. Fantastic example. Or we can attract off-takers of heat to our location to ensure that there is that gain in efficiency of ensuring that a product is not going wasted, which is the heat coming out of the plant. Those are two just really small examples. Of course, the precinct piece goes way beyond that, and again, Scott really touched on that as well earlier, so I won't dwell too much on that. But suffice to say that I think for Australia, the energy from waste can really act as a catalyst to bring this vision to life, and I'll close with that.